I was passing through Tooele, Utah, on my way to Vegas for my 21st birthday, when I encountered Uncle Dizzno's Funhouse. I had pulled over at a cheap and crappy diner for dinner, and was chowing down on an impossibly greasy hamburger when I glanced out the window across the road. I have no idea how I've missed it before, and my rationale at the time was that the lights were turned off when I went into the diner, and turned them on after I had sat down. It looked fun. It was an outdoor theme park with a Ferris wheel and a log flume, and several attractions inside the tents. I finished my crappy food, paid, and went across the road to the park. The park itself was called Wonderland, as displayed by the large sign with light bulbs spelling out the words. I began to walk through the arc, stopping at the bright ticket booth. There were no signs to indicate the price, so I just pulled out my wallet and asked the man in the booth, "How much?" Speaking of the man in the booth, he was mostly hidden by shadow, but from what I could make out, his head was impossibly large. He was very skinny, and he was very still.
It's Saturday the 14th. Everyone gets in free today.
Wow, thanks. Great deal. I passed through the turnstile and entered the park. There was a large midway with two buildings on each side, with the big top at the end. The Ferris wheel was in the middle of the midway, and the log flume was at the back, near the big top. There was only about 50 or so more patrons, but they seemed to be enjoying themselves. One of the four buildings was a ghost train, and I figured out I would try that first. It was nothing special. The coolest part was when a man turned into a skeleton. The animatronic guy was standing there, and a huge cloud of smoke appeared, and when it cleared, a skeleton was standing there instead of a man. The next thing I did go on was the Ferris wheel. It wasn't very big, and looked like it would collapse at any moment, but it was fun. After that, I bought some popcorn and candy floss, which actually tasted pretty good. Better than the food at the diner, but it would be hard not to be. Then I moved on to the next building. This one was Uncle Dizzno's Funhouse of Bewilderment. Other banners around the main sign stated things like "A Barrel of Fun" and "Go Nuts." I decided to go in. The first room I entered was a room with brightly colored stripes on the walls. There were pool noodles hanging from the ceiling that you had to push through. It was disorienting, but fun. The next room had strobe lights and beach balls hanging down in your face. The third room was full of funhouse mirrors. I enjoyed making myself look like a fat little midget in one, and in another I looked like a tree. I laughed pretty hard in that room. For some reason, this room, which would normally be nothing special, was one of the funniest things I have ever seen in my life. I was willing to bet this was the last room, but instead of leading outside, it led into a tent. The tent was bare, except for a table in the center. The table was a round one, with a red tablecloth. There was a man sitting at the table. He wore a derby hat, with a small flower stuck to the front covering up a crop of orange hair. A white face with blue paint around his lips, green eyebrows, and a big red nose. His hands were white and long, red nails that almost looked like claws. His clothes looked just as stupid as the rest of him, with pants that had one leg striped and one blue, a polka dot shirt with striped sleeves, and a green and yellow striped waistcoat. He wore no shoes at all, but had a pair of colorful stockings on. Clowns have always sort of creeped me out. "Are you Uncle Dizzno?" I asked.
"You betcha, kiddo,"
he said in a raspy, deep, cheerful voice. "How do I get out?"
"Don't you want to stick around longer, buddy? Isn't it fun in here, pal?"
Yeah, it was pretty cool, but I need to get going. I'm going to Vegas for my birthday.
"Oh, is that so? If it's your birthday, how about we have a little party? Wanna see a magic trick?"
Well, I really need to get going, so
Ah, but it'll only take a sec. Here, I'll make myself change into your worst nightmare.
What? I noticed his eyes had begun to film over a bright yellow. Are you okay?
Yes. Now get ready, 'cause this is where it gets all the more horrifying.
The yellow glow in his eyes intensified. They began to bulge and pop out. His big red clown nose began to swell up, bigger and bigger, until it was the size of an orange, and then exploded. Green chunky fluid splattered out of his burst nose, dripping onto the table. His head began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, all the way around like an owl. Chunks of skin began peeling off his hands. As his head spun, it was like a potato peeler was being held to his face. The skin just peeled off, like a banana. Suddenly, his head snapped back, perfectly straight, now just the bloody skull with that stupid little hat staring right at me. He screamed, and his skeletal hands reached out, clasping around my neck. I cracked his wrist, struggling to get away. The hands snapped off, still clasped around my neck. When I fell to the floor, they left hold of my throat, flying through the air and connecting back up with his bony wrists. I turned and ran. Uncle Dizzno was in the mirrors. He smashed his hands through the glass as I passed, hands reaching at me. He was standing in the exit. There was no way around him. I tackled him to the ground outside, his skeletal body snapping into pieces. I was running towards the exit. Everything in the park was vastly different. All the patrons I had seen before were lying on the floor, dead, horribly burned. The buildings were on fire. The big top collapsed in on itself, sending fire in all directions. Dizzno dropped from the Ferris wheel in front of me and began spitting out a pink, stringy substance which looked and smelled like candy floss to try to trap me, but I managed to get out of the way. I was almost at the gates when they closed. A light came from on in the ticket booth, and that damn clown was inside.
Come on, kiddo. I just want to kill ya,
he said. Fuck off. Open the damn gates or I'll kill you.
Sorry, buddy. I'm already dead.
He smashed through the glass of the ticket booth, knocking me to the ground. He was on top of me, had me pinned. He slashed his nails across my face, opening up 4 bloody gashes. I grabbed a rock and pounded it on his head. His eye sockets began spitting fire as he screamed as his skull cracked. He fell off me, but I barely had time to recover myself. He spat more strings of candy floss from his mouth, coating me. I fell over, and Dizzno came over to me, spitting more candy floss like a spider wrapping up his prey. I struggled, but the strings were like a steel net. Dizzno squatted over me.
Well, kid, looks like I won this game of tag. Now you're it.
Before I could reply, a honeybee flew onto my chest. The first bee was followed by more. They were climbing out of his mouth, burrowing into candy floss. Soon they would reach my body and begin burrowing in that too. I could not get out, but it seems as if luck was on my side. One of the burning beams of the ticket line's roof cracked, and a thin piece broke off, falling onto my chest. The burning ember began melting through the candy floss. The delectable treat I was wrapped in snapped, and I was able to get an arm free. I punched the skeletal clown in the face, landing him on his rump. He screamed in rage, and more bees erupted from his skull. I quickly tore away from my cocoon, and at last I was free. Dizzno lunged at me, but I jumped out of the way, smashing through the gates. I ran and didn't look back. The diner. I began shouting for help once I got inside. "What's the matter, kid?" asked the man at the register. His eyes widened as he saw the slash marks on my face. "Jesus, did a mountain lion go after you?" "No, the circus and clown, Uncle Dizzno. What circus? Uncle Dizzno? What the fuck kind of drugs you on, kid?" I know exactly what the kid means. This raspy voice came from the booth next to us. The person in there was an old man in a black coat. He elaborated. 10 years ago, there was a circus across the way from this very diner. It was pretty successful, and one of the biggest attractions was the Funhouse. At the end of the thing, it usually went into the big top, which was not accessible from the outside. You could only exit the tent after you had watched the residence clowns act. However, nobody liked this idea. The clown just wasn't funny. One night, the clown got into a fight with a heckler. He began poking fun at the clown and tried to leave before the act was finished. The clown snapped, shoved his head into the cotton candy machine, killed him. Clown said he was sick of wearing makeup, peeled his face off with a knife, and set the entire place on fire, killed everyone in it. People say that every Saturday the 14th, the clown comes back from the grave and picks one person to invite to the carnival. Then he kills them. Only about 3 folks have ever survived this, and this kid's one of them. Oh, and one more thing. The clown was a friend of mine. His name was Uncle Dizzno. And with that, he left.